be interesting to go to Mark now as our final speaker and final panellist. Mark, you're the Deputy Director of the Policy Association for Renewable Energy and Clean Technologies, IrBEA UK, and we're delighted that you could come today and maybe give us an update on and insights from the UK Biomass Strategy Report, which was only launched in the last couple of weeks, which we're hopeful might inspire Ireland to look at something similar. So I know you have 2 slides, I think.
Two quick slides, which will just summarise it.
Could you give us some high-level messages from the UK strategy?
And I'll try and keep it brief so that we can keep to your promise.
Or is it a bioenergy? It covers broadly the bioenergy.
Yeah, so it was titled a biomass strategy, but in actual fact is a bioenergy strategy. It covers right across power, heat and transport and looks at all the different sectors. Don't really know why they called it a biomass strategy, maybe just to confuse people and to keep things confusing as ever in this sector. Just to quickly introduce the IrBEA, we're the UK's trade association for renewable energy. So we represent technologies right across power, heat and transport, everything from solar, EV, energy storage, and we have lots of bioenergy members as well across power, heat and transport. So we've been feeding very heavily into the development of this biomass strategy within the UK context. I think the first thing to say about the outcome of the strategy was it was actually quite a positive bill of health for the sector, which, as Giacomo was just describing in the EU context and also in the UK context, can't be taken for granted. It does remain a contentious issue, but particularly I highlight this quote from the strategy, which is by Professor Paul Monks, who's the Chief Scientific Officer to the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero in Westminster, which basically says biomass can play a significant role in decarbonising nearly all sectors of the economy. It's really, really important that we have that statement coming out from the UK government. It is saying biomass is here to stay. It does have a role to play in net zero and decarbonisation, and that's right across power, heat and transport. So that in itself is a really positive and useful thing to have happen. As you would expect, sustainability remains a key central aspect of the biomass strategy, and probably the big policy development that we are going to see that from this strategy is a commitment from government to this development of a cross-sectoral sustainability framework. So all of the different bioenergy sectors, power, heat, transport, already have very well-developed governance arrangements in the UK, but they all look at things slightly differently. They look at how you measure greenhouse gas emissions slightly differently. They look at supply chains slightly differently. There are reasons for those differences in approach, but what the UK government is wanting to produce is some kind of overlaying principles, which are in reality, I think, going to be quite closely related to RED III, but overlaying principles of, are these sustainability governance arrangements doing the right thing? So that's going to be a big thing for next year, and that will come into consultation, and a real challenge for the sector. It does also recognise a strong ongoing role for both domestically produced biomass and imports into the UK. If you know much about the UK bioenergy sector, we have a lot of imports, especially on the biomass power side, but we do also have domestic production. But the key focus here is we need to be increasing our domestic production as well and looking at ways to do that, but imports will continue to have a strong role to play. A key aspect of this biomass strategy is to develop a new priority use framework, which I'll come on to on my next slide. But it sets out a kind of direction of travel for the whole industry, for where bioenergy and biomass, where the UK government thinks it should be being used into the future. And a key aspect of that is going to be bioenergy, carbon capture and storage. And that was a very clear message within this strategy, that by the 2030s into the 2050s, bioenergy, they want to prioritise the use of carbon capture and storage with bioenergy use. So if we move on to my last slide, this is the diagram that they produced to demonstrate this priority use framework. I appreciate it's quite hard to read up on the screen, but it is in the biomass strategy itself, and these slides will be made available. But the first thing to say is that this is a framework and not a hierarchy. And that's incredibly important, and something we worked very heavily with the government department on understanding, that if you start to dictate where biomass should be used, you're going to make the wrong choices. You need to allow the market to understand how biomass should be used across power, heat and transport. But what they are saying is that when looking at biomass use, you need to look at the sustainability, the air quality, its impacts on net zero, so those longer term ambitions, and the circular economy and resource efficiency. And what they've kind of said within the strategy is, in the short term today, they're very happy with how bioenergy is being used. They recognise a strong role for it within heat, power, transport, and that is going to continue into the 2030s. That continues up to about our carbon budget 6. So in the UK, we have these 5-yearly carbon budgets that need to be met. And they say, you know, the current industry is going to have a strong role to play in the UK meeting carbon budget 6. But through that process in the 2030s into the 2050s, as I said, they are saying, well, really, we need to be moving towards abated biomass uses, so that's carbon capture and storage, and focusing on hard-to-treat sectors. And for the UK, that's going to be things like hydrogen production, sustainable aviation fuels, and potentially hard-to-treat areas within heat as well. So that's the kind of direction of travel that the UK
Very
is
good.
in.
It's a good insight into the strategy. I've read the document myself, and it would be nice if we had something similar at an Irish level, and let's hope maybe for that into the future. Maybe one final question, Mark. What current supports are available for solid biomass in the UK? Just if you can just give us a very brief summary of what's currently available.
Yeah, so briefly on biomass heat, in the heat market, solid biomass, there is some support at the domestic level through the scheme called the Boiler Upgrade Scheme, which provides about a £5,000 grant to households who want to decarbonise, and biomass can apply for that. It has to be in rural areas. Unfortunately, the government did recently increase the grant for heat pumps, so there was some news there that they've increased the grant to £7,500. They haven't done that for biomass, which is disappointing. That's because they are continuing to do an electrification approach first. On the non-domestic side, the story is quite different. There is some very targeted support through grant mechanisms, such as a public sector decarbonisation scheme focused on the public sector, as the name would suggest, and the Industrial Energy Transformation Fund, where biomass can get some money out of that, but it's difficult because of the thresholds that they put on that as well. Something we're working in the government in the UK is that following the closure of the non-domestic RHI sort of 2 years ago, there's now a very significant policy gap in place there, and we're pushing government to address that gap, specifically in relation to commercial and industrial heat decarbonisation and the role biomass has there.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Mark, for that valuable insight into what's happening at a UK level, and I think at that we will draw our panel discussion to a close. So thanks to Anna, to Philip, to Giacomo, and to Mark for being on our panel. So just for a few very brief closing remarks, I'd like to thank all of you, our delegates, for attending here today. On behalf of the Irish Bioenergy Association, we hope you found it useful and informative, and perhaps gives you some further understanding as to the varying bioenergy sectors here and the role that it potentially has in emissions reduction across many different sectors. I'd like to particularly thank again our sponsors, Bord Namona and Gas Networks Ireland. Many thanks to all our speakers, presenters and panellists, and particularly those who travel long distances to be here with us today. I'd like to thank the staff of the Royal Marine Hotel for your taking care of us and feeding us and looking after us. Thanks also to our sound team, and also to our videographer, and as I said, all of our presentations, and a full recording of all the sessions will be available on our website, on the National Bioenergy Conference website, .ie website, in the coming week. And finally, just to thank my own team, to Noel for chairing the conference. Thanks to Noel for that, and the efforts you put in preparing. To Trish Lawler for also helping out in the organising of the conference. To Stephen for managing and all the presentations and videos and all of that aspect, and all your work over the last number of weeks and months. And special thanks to Teresa, Teresa's here, for all your hard work in organising and promoting and getting this event organised, and for its successful conclusion today. A lot of work happened behind the scenes over the last number of months to get to this conference organised, and we thank Teresa very much for all your hard work and efforts in getting all that done. So I'd like to show a round of applause for Teresa. So with that, I'd like to again just thank you all, and I hope you all get home safely. And until the next time, we thank you all again and look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you.